Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending Roland Shore and Tower's webinar running remotely. We have two great speakers for you today. First up is Tony Sollers. He's the Chief Technologist of Roland Shore. He's got a background in network and systems architecture. He'll be talking today about how to manage a remote workforce and ways to keep your team productive. Hi, Tony.
Hey, everybody.
We're also very happy to have Ben Shore joining us as well. Ben is one of the former partners of Roland Shore, an author, and most currently a senior technical writer for Microsoft. He'll be discussing some of the tools and resources Microsoft has available to help businesses run cohesively from remote locations. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Good to be here. Nice to see all of you.
We're going to have a question and answer session at the end, so please post your questions in the feed as we go along, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can before we run out of time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony to get us started.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us all today and giving us a little bit of your valuable time. Today, we're going to talk about some strategies that'll help your business, thrive and be successful while your employees are all working from home. And what I want you to have as a takeaway is some actionable strategies to walk away from. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Some of today's topics that we're going to go over is how what are your things your employees need to work from home? How do you set your employees up for success? And then also some ideas of how do you actually manage your remote workforce? And we're also going to talk about building a remote team with mutual accountability and how actually do you set up and hold your team accountable and set reminders and tasks and deadlines and such. And then finally, Ben is going to talk about some of the technologies that you can utilize in your business to make all of these things actually work in your business with your team and remote. So I'm just going to jump right into our first thing. But of course, all of your employees, I'm sure the thing that they're enjoying the most about working from home is the short commute. So what do employees need to work from home? Well, the first thing you need to think about is equipping your team with some great technology. The biggest frustration is their computers and their internet and all that thing not working. So having a laptop or a computer set up for them that works and is effective is important, has a camera on it. But important thing to remember is security is still vitally important. All of the threat actors and the hackers out there know that everyone is going through this crisis. And they're taking full advantage of it. They're not being nice. They're not being empathetic to your situation at all. We've seen from the latest Sophos report that email phishing attacks are up 60-fold in the last month alone, which is emails coming in with links to malicious websites that are trying to infect computers and infect your systems and trying to, ransomware attacks, malware attacks, those kinds of things. So continuing to educate your people and those kinds of things around security is very important. Having stable and reliable internet is also important for your people working from home. One of the biggest, probably the #1 help desk ticket we get in daily is my wireless at home not working. And so we always encourage our people, if whenever you can, try to connect with a wire and stay off the wireless at home, especially when you're doing streaming and video and that kind of thing. Secure access to company data is another thing to have to equipping your team for success. Secure access to business email, whether that be on their business laptop, whether that be on a mobile smartphone, whether that be on an iPad. Setting that up for them and having easy access to that and secure is essential. And also, don't forget about the phone system. Everyone assumes that the phone just always works, but then what we saw when everyone had to go from home is how do we get our phones to, how do we answer our phones? So if you've got voice over IP, it's a no-brainer. It's pretty easy to take a soft phone or a phone and just use it from home. But what if you don't? And so are you using a cell phone? And then what kind of phone system are you going to use to forward those calls and the number of stuff. So setting these things up for your people and having the ability to answer and use phones from their work from home situation is important. And we'd be glad to, if you have any questions about these things and just need some guidance, we'd be glad to answer any questions you've got. So jumping right in here, another thing is we always, with our teams, is encourage a dedicated workspace. And it's pretty common, you know, everyone knows this, but it's amazing how many people don't do this. And what we always talk to our workers with is, you know, create a home office, you know, and not everybody has a home office, but create a space in your home that's away from the communal space that everyone else is sharing. Because what's going on in our homes right now is there's kids and there's wives and there's other people all home, either not working or working from home, and kids are out of school. And so it may just be setting up an office in the bathroom, in a closet, a basement, somewhere. And that doesn't have to be a permanent office. Maybe it's a makeshift office just during the business day that's set up, but at least it's away from everybody else. It's somewhat private, and it's somewhere that person can focus during the day. So this is something just to encourage in your staff to have, and it will really help with their productivity. Dressing for success, it actually matters. So everyone dreams of working from home, rolling out of bed, and then 15 minutes walking, in 15 minutes with that short, you know, 5-second commute, walking into the office in their pajamas and never actually having to get dressed the whole day. As those of us who have worked from home for years know that doesn't work. The psychology of that, it really wears on you after time. So encouraging your teams to continue to keep that same the same routine in the mornings. Get up at the same times, have morning coffee, you know, take the shower, do the hygienes, work out if you usually work out in the mornings, and go through those same routines that you used to do when you would drive into the office to prepare mentally for the day, and then actually get dressed and go in and then walk into your office space. It makes a huge difference. And finally, non-work interactions and team building times. These are things that when you're in the office just kind of occur, right? Or you would have planned events for, but are not happening anymore, right? And so these things happened organically in the hallways or during lunch or during, you know, break time that just occurred automatically, right? Well, these aren't happening anymore because people are isolated. So you need to think about creating time and space for workers to talk about news and hobbies and other topics. So a way to do this would be to allow a little bit of time at the end of meetings just to have some catch-up time. You know, how are people doing? What'd you guys do this weekend? And allow some time to de-stress and just laugh, basically. So this is what a lot of remote teams will do. Provide also support for your team. And so this comes back to mental health and self-care. You know, encourage exercise, quality sleep, good hygiene in your teams. As leaders, what we need to do is we need to show that we're present and that we're available. So if someone is having some problems, you know, mental health or personal home problems, that we're available for a phone call or a video call to talk about those things. So now we're going to move into, now that we've set up all of our employees for success, right? We've created their environment, we've encouraged the healthy things for them. How do we actually manage those remote teams? Number one is great communication. And this ties back into everything we've already talked about. And so I call it kind of the 3 pillars, right? Communication, trust, and support. To have successful a remote team, you have to not micromanage. And this is pinpoint here. You must trust your people. Encourage them to be self-motivated and disciplined. They should know that it's their job to reach out to you or to their manager or somebody when they need help and not wait to be checked up on. Encourage them to be self-thinkers. You want to facilitate results and outcomes rather than or you want to facilitate results and outcomes, performance, and setting proper expectations with your employees so that you can utilize a method of mutual accountability, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So another way to manage your remote workforce is using video. So we've talked a little bit about video, but video is vitally important. You want to have regular check-in calls, and so you can do these. You can have daily check-ins. I've worked in many organizations where I've helped build teams where we call them stand-ups, and every morning we have a stand-up, or we have stand-ups twice a week. Whatever you want to call them, they're just video calls with the team that come in and just check in. It can be short, 15 minutes. They can be a little longer if they're less often in the week. Also, don't forget about the one-on-one calls with your people. If it's once a month with each employee, with your direct, if you got a manager who's managing your whole place, maybe that's a daily call, and use video. Nothing beats video, because you can hear inflections in their voice. You can check on how people are doing. Set up virtual office hours, and as a leader, be present, and so that people know that you're around and available. Another tool to use when managing a remote teams is chat, or what we call instant messaging, right? And in years ago, this was something that all of our kids did with cell phones or instant messaging apps, and it's actually become a very essential part of business. But it needs to be easy, and so there are some great platforms out there that you can use. And one of them, so instant messaging, you need to create some channels in there for maybe specific to projects you're working on, specific to areas of the business. You can create some channels that are like for humorous topics, like a comedy channel and training ideas, and then maybe just some general miscellaneous. These are important for that, de-stressing and letting off steam type of activities in your workforce, to help them all connect and not feel isolated. These instant messaging application platforms allow people to send files back and forth securely, share screens when they're struggling on something and they need to work together. Allows virtual whiteboards, because we're not all in the office anymore. We can't just jump in and get on a whiteboard. Make use of these technologies. There's platforms like Microsoft Teams, like what we're using today, or even Slack is another application out there. Also, what's great about these applications is they have the ability to use video, and like Teams here, you can use them to blur the backgrounds. You can set up virtual backgrounds, so people who don't feel comfortable with maybe the background of where their office is in their home, or maybe slightly embarrassed or whatever, and that leads to why they don't want to do video, they can blur that out, and that's not an excuse they can use to get on video. So the 30-minute rule. So this is I leave this for the last slide about how we manage our remote teams, because it's the most important that I feel. It really helps your team. What is the 30-minute rule? Well, the rule is, if you're working on an issue and you're stuck and not making any progress for 30 minutes, you reach out to a coworker for assistance. And this does a couple of things. So if you have one of your coworkers are stuck and they reach out to one of your employees are stuck and you reach out to a coworker, that coworker may have that knowledge already and can teach them. And then it solidifies their knowledge by teaching, kind of the teach the teacher method. If that person doesn't know have that knowledge and they've reached out to them, then they end up both being able to work together collaboratively, and then they both learn it, and then it expands the knowledge of your organization. And sometimes what happens is when someone gets stuck on something, just by explaining the problem, it rubs those brain cells together a little bit. Just by explaining them, it kind of like triggers something, and then we're able to kind of figure it out. When we're isolated, we get kind of stuck. And so time and time again, I've been using this method for over 10 years now, building teams both on-premise and remote, and it works very effectively. It doesn't necessarily have to be 30 minutes. It could be 30 minutes, it could be 40 minutes, it could be an hour. You have to kind of figure out what that time frame is for your organization. But having a hard, fast rule and encouraging that behavior is important. How does RST do it? Well, video is king. We use video in everything we do, and we also have 2 stand-ups per week. We do video in all of our stand-ups, and this is time where we come in and talk about what's going on. All of our teams come prepared to provide insight, and their insight is valuable, and they know that. I ask all of them to come prepared to say, what have you completed? What are you working on? And what are you stuck on? And they always come prepared with these ideas, and they have a list, and then we go through it as a team, and then we share, and then someone usually comes up and says, hey, I've worked on that, I can help with that. And it's a great time to connect. We also have mini huddles throughout the week. And those mini huddles are just things we're working on, projects or problems that we're working on, and each of the teams will reach out to each other and have these little mini video huddles. And then we have a company meeting that happens once every 2 weeks where the whole company gets together on video and audio, and we're utilizing OneNote and SharePoint and Teams to do that with. Basically what it comes down to is the easier it is for your teams to stay in touch, the more successful they'll be. So how do we wrap all this, setting your teams up for success, managing your teams remotely? How do we hold them accountable? How do we know that if we assign them something to do or there's a deadline that they're going to get it done? Well, this all comes down to accountability. So holding your teams accountable is great, but your team seeing that you're accountable to yourself sets a tone within your business. So it's kind of like don't do what I say what I do what I do kind of thing. So you need to portray that you yourself as the leader of the business is accountable, and they will follow suit. This is more important even when you have remote teams and when you're all in the office. Secondly is the effective use of calendars. So you need to use calendars as effective as possible. Train your staff how to use calendars. You need to set up the permissions in your calendars effectively so that people can see each other's calendars right. But it's more than this. It's also teaching people time management skills. So when they have deadlines and they have projects and they have things to do, that they're putting those things in their calendars and blocking time out, not just for the deadlines, but teaching them how to block time out and protect their time so that they have time to work on these things to get them done. So these are all things that we teach and train and encourage. And then organizing tasks with tracking. And so there's lots of applications out there and technologies that you can use to do this, and we'd be glad to. I don't have time to talk in detail about all of them, but there's Outlook tasks, there's Microsoft To Do, there's Trello. There's CRM systems that can do this. SharePoint Planner. There's kind of a light version and more of one for project management. The end result is you can use these tools for individually or as a company to set expectations, set timelines and due dates, and hold accountability on these things when you have these video check-in meetings with people. And lastly, having a recognition award. And so what this is as a business leader, you figure out what behaviors that you want to encourage in your people and in your organization and in your processes. So you say, hey, this is something I really want to work on. And it comes down to mentoring your people and encouraging your people to grow. And you have to decide these are the behaviors that I want, this individual person or as a group us to work on. And so then you encourage those things and build a recognition program around them. And what we do, we're a whole group of nerds, which is what you should want in your IT team. So we call ours the Avenger Award because we love superheroes and superhero movies. And so when one of our team members goes out and does something above and beyond, like for the team, for the client, then we even have places where the team members can actually vote for each other and say, hey, I saw such and such doing this, and I want to give him an Avenger Award vote. And then at the end, about once a month, we give it away, and then that person gets lunch on us because IT people tend to skip lunch a lot, and I want to encourage them to not do that. So finally, at the end of this whole webinar, I'll be glad to answer any questions about what I've covered. I look forward to that. But now I'm look forward to introducing my co-chair, Ben Shore, who's going to talk about Microsoft technologies.
Thanks, Tony. Let me share my screen here. Hopefully, let me know when you're seeing it, hopefully momentarily. Any luck?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay. So I was glad when Tony asked me if I wanted to present on this. It's obviously an extremely important topic right now, and it's a topic where we're all in the same boat, as it were. Here at Microsoft, we have over 40,000 employees on our Redmond campus. Probably 95% of us are working from home right now. And so that is a massive stress test on our systems and procedures for working remotely. And we're learning a lot, which is exciting. So the first tool I wanted to talk about that's part of Microsoft 365 is what Tony mentioned, is Microsoft Teams. And so Teams is our hub for teamwork. And I realized, it might be more effective if I just real quick show you what it looks like rather than trying to tell you what it looks like. This is a demo tenant. I can't show you my live Teams app for obvious reasons. But this is Microsoft Teams, if you haven't seen it before. And Tony had mentioned creating channels. So what we have here is these items that you see with the colorful icons. Okay, those are teams that have been created, and you can create as many or as few teams as you want. People tend to create teams around big projects, or maybe like a water cooler type team, like Tony was talking about, as a place for people to just gather informally. You could create teams around big customers, or depends on what area, kind of business you're in. But you can have as many or as few teams as you want, and then within those teams, you can see that there are individual channels, and then within those channels, you can have discussions. It looks like this one's got some sample discussion. None of these people are actual people, by the way. These are, of course, fictitious accounts. So don't worry about, you're not peeking in on somebody's actual conversations here. And then so within the channels, you have chat that's happening, persistent chat. And then there are files. So there's a files library that lets you share your files and collaborate on files. And a wiki and a few other things. I'm not sure if the wiki's actually been used in this test data. But that's a quick overview of what you can do in Teams. Is you create those chat channels. You can use files, you can share files and collaborate on files. Teams can also be used as your phone system, depending on your subscription. It doesn't look like this test system has the phone system on it. That's okay. But here at Microsoft, we use Teams as our phone system as well. And you can too, if that's something you wanted to do. All right, let me jump back into my slides real quick. Okay. So we have the concept of teams. We also have the concept of groups. And the question I get a lot is, when should I use groups or when should I use teams in Microsoft 365? So either one of them lets you create a place for your team to work together. Like those teams we just saw in that very quick demo, where you can create a team or a group around a particular customer, a particular project, a particular product. And either teams or groups, you can invite guests to. Now, in Microsoft speak, a guest is somebody outside your organization. You don't have to invite guests. And in fact, if you don't want your users to invite guests to your groups or teams, you can actually disable that capability. But if you do want to invite guests, either usually you'd invite, maybe if you have a partner company that you work with, you might invite some of them to particular teams or groups to participate. In some cases, you might invite a client or a customer to a team or group if it was appropriate. But groups is sort of email centric. It's based around the inbox. You access groups primarily through Outlook or Outlook on the web. It's got a shared inbox and a shared calendar. And then just like Teams, it also has that shared SharePoint file library. You get a shared OneNote notebook. You get a shared plan and planner, things like that, a few other things. In groups, that shared inbox has its own email address, which you can configure, of course, separate from the email inboxes of each of the people in the group. And you can decide whether or not you want that group to be able to accept email from outside your company or not. That might be helpful, for example, if you have a Microsoft 365 group configured around a project or a product, and maybe you're getting email notifications from some outside entity about that project or product. You could give that outside entity the email address of the group instead of an individual in the group, and that way all those notices go into the group's mailbox where everybody in the group can see them. The other thing that's kind of nice about that shared inbox is that it's preserved. That email is preserved. So if other people join the group later on, you hire new employees, for example, they can scroll back through the history of that group and also search it so they can see the email history involved. Now, Teams, which we just glanced at for a moment there, is based around persistent chat. There are, of course, also third-party apps that you can integrate into Teams. So things like Law Toolbox or Trello. So you've got a bunch of different third-party apps that you can use. So I just grabbed a screenshot of some of them. This is just a tiny collection. There's hundreds of third-party apps available. Both Microsoft apps that we've created, things like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, but of course also third-party things like Trello and Poly and SurveyMonkey, Asana, Adobe Creative Cloud. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can use in there. So you can add those third-party apps as well, and then that creates a tab within your team for that app. So part of the idea there is that you can use Teams as your hub, that you don't have to leave Teams very often. You might leave Teams to go to your browser, but otherwise you're not switching around to a bunch of different programs. Everything happens inside of Teams, or most things do. And I mentioned that you can use Teams also as your telephone system if that's something you want to do. You may have another system and that's fine too. So that's my first little bit I want to talk about there on Teams. The second thing I wanted to talk about for remote work is office.com. This is a great tool if your employees who are now working from home don't have company issued devices. If they do have company issued devices, you've presumably provided them with Microsoft Office. But if they're just using their home machine, you might not be providing Microsoft Office perhaps to their home machine. And so office.com, let me show you that. We can do a quick look at that too. So here's the office.com portal. Again, this is that demo tenant. And so here you can see you've got Word and Excel and PowerPoint. These are all web apps. And down below, you can see these are files that are stored in the company SharePoint or OneDrive. And the files that you see down here and the files that the user would find in search up here are only files that they have permissions to. That's a question I get a lot is, are they going to see everything if they, in this portal? And the answer is no. They only see the files that they have permissions to access. So using the web apps can be a great solution remotely for a couple of reasons. Number one, it tends to be pretty low bandwidth. So if your users have fairly not very fast bandwidth, the web apps tend to work pretty well in a low bandwidth environment. The second reason that the web apps are good is because they're great for collaboration. If multiple people are editing the same Word document, the same Excel workbook or something like that, using the web apps for it can be a lot cleaner and give you good collab. You can collaborate live in our desktop apps as well. It just tends to work a little smoother, especially in low bandwidth situations in the web apps. And then the final good reason for the web apps is that it's more secure. If they're using their personal devices especially. And that's because when they open a Word document, for example, in Word for the web, they're not downloading that Word app to their that Word file, that document to their local machine. So you don't have another copy of your Word document floating around out there on somebody's personal machine that, if they ever leave your company, that personal machine goes with them, of course, because that's their machine. Their kids might be using that machine. There's a lot of potential security issues there. And so by using the web apps, the file never leaves your SharePoint or your OneDrive system. The web app, it's just displayed in the browser, and so that's a lot more secure. I guess the other thing I should mention is that when you're using Office.com and Microsoft 365, you also get some other handy features for working remotely. So, for example, if you're doing a meeting remotely where you're presenting, you can turn on live subtitles. And so now I just turned on live subtitles, and it's listening. Oh, it's presenting in German. That's cool. So let me change that back to English. That would be helpful. There we go. So now it should be transcribing my spoken words into English, which is good because I don't speak German. So this is handy, again, if you're in an environment where you don't have great bandwidth and it's easier for people to follow along with your presentation when you've got some subtitles at the bottom of the screen. So that's something to keep in mind there. And as you saw, you can also have them translated into a different language if you happen to be having a meeting where you're sharing with other people. Okay, so I mentioned OneDrive and SharePoint. Let me give you a quick explanation of when you would use OneDrive or SharePoint when you're working remotely. So OneDrive is for your, we like to say they're for your, it's for your me files, the files that you're working on yourself. In a traditional network environment, you may remember you may have had a server on your premises that had like an S drive or something like that, and that drive had folders just for the individual users. So those files that are your files, those should go in your OneDrive. You can share OneDrive files, you can collaborate on them, but by default, the permissions on your OneDrive are just for you. SharePoint is for your we files, files that you're going to work on with the whole team. So you might have a SharePoint document library around a particular product or project or customer or client. And so that SharePoint document library is for those files related to that project or client. where multiple people are going to collaborate, and those files are then owned by that SharePoint library. That's also really helpful because if, let's say Alice leaves your firm, leaves your company, files that she's created, you may have to figure out how are we going to, first of all, what files does she have? How do we get those files into a place where we can still use them because she's leaving? If the files are in SharePoint, it's not a problem because the files are owned by the group. So Alice can come and go, but the files are in the group. So me files versus we files. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to mention here is securing Microsoft 365. Security, as Tony mentioned, is more important than ever in the remote age. Security with the most important thing you can do to secure your Microsoft 365 is turn on multi-factor authentication for all your users. So let me real quick explain what that means. So in security and authentication, we have factors. So for example, you traditionally log in with a username and password, that's a factor. Okay, and there's three basic kinds of factors in authentication. There's something like a password, or if you, for example, use a ATM card at your bank to get your cash out, that memorized PIN number that you're using, that's also something you know. The second kind of factor would be something you have. So for example, a smartphone, or maybe you have a USB device of some sort that you connect into your machine as a physical token. Okay, that's something you have, your phone or that USB token. And then the third kind would be something you are. So that would be like a retinal scan, a facial recognition scan, a fingerprint. Okay, so those are the three kinds of factors: something you know, something you have, or something you are. Okay, and for multi-factor authentication, you want to use at least two of those factors. So using a password and a memorized PIN number, that's not multi-factor authentication. That's two of the same factor. Okay, what you really want to use is, for example, maybe a password and a smartphone. Okay, then you've got different kinds of factors. So to wrap that up into what makes sense for you, when you're securing Office 365, you can turn on multi-factor authentication. And what that means is that the first time that one of your users logs in from a new machine, or the first time after they've changed their password, they'll put in their username and password, like always, and then it's going to ask for a second factor. So for example, on this slide, you can see on the far right side, that's the Microsoft Authenticator app that you see there. And so it might say, okay, now give me the 6-digit code from your Authenticator app. And those 6-digit codes that you see there on that Authenticator app change every 30 seconds. So now you've signed in, you give it the Authenticator app, now you're signed in. And that you only need that second factor the first time you sign in on that device or after you've just changed your password. So tomorrow, your user is not going to necessarily have to sign in with the second factor again, unless you've enforced that. You do have the ability to turn on, you can enforce it and make them use that second factor more often if you want to. But what's important about this is that means that if some hacker in Russia has somehow gotten a hold of your username and password, or your user's username and password, and they try to log into your Microsoft 365 account, because you've never logged in from the machine they're using, presumably, when they try to log in, it's going to say, great, you've got the username and password. Now, what's the code from the smartphone app, from the Authenticator app? Well, unless they have your phone, they don't have that Authenticator app from you, and they can't do it. So having that multi-factor authentication turned on defeats the vast majority of password hacking attacks. So when you're working remotely, I strongly encourage you to take a good look at the security you have in place. And I'm sure Tony would be happy to chat with you if you want to give him a call and talk to him about what you can do to improve your security. But it's even more important now when your users are outside your company walls and they're sitting at their dining room table with your company data on their machine. So make sure that's secure. And then the second thing I'd encourage is give some thought to who has what. By that I mean it's a little easier in the SharePoint and OneDrive era because you have to be more specific about giving permissions. But I've seen way too many companies where they just set default permissions on folders and everybody has access to every file. That can be pretty problematic, especially when there's ransomware and other kinds of things out there. It's a good time to take a look around and make sure that people only have access to the files they really need to have access to, and that they're not accessing too many things or have access to too many things. So let's see, I left a little extra time for questions, and I wanted to share these resources also with you. So these are some free resources we have at Microsoft. That first one up there, support.office.com, That site has thousands. Last time I checked, I think it was about 32,000 articles, training videos, and other resources available on it, all for free. The second one, the template site, templates.office.com, is our template site. You can find thousands of mostly free templates for Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other things. Some of them business related, some of them not. But if you go to templates.office.com, you can see all of those. And then the third item there, I get people all the time who are like, I remember when I used to buy Office, and I used to get, you get that big book that came with it, the manual that came with the product. Where's the manual? Well, press F1. That's the manual. That's where it went. There's thousands of pages of help information in the in-app help system now, all fully searchable. And so if you get stuck in Word or Excel, PowerPoint, whatever, tap that F1 key on your keyboard, and the help system is there to try and help you answer the question. So at this point, Mati, did we have any questions for me?
Yeah, we have a couple of them, and thank you, Ben. That was very informative. Our first question is for Tony, and the question is, how do you encourage the use of video for those who are very camera shy?
Uh-oh, did we lose Tony?
He's muted.
There we go. I'm there.
There we go.
So that's a great question. It comes down to what we talked about in the beginning, encouraging. What really helps is encouraging the dedicated workspace, encouraging the routines, because if your people are laying in their bedrooms in bed in their pajamas, they're very unlikely to get on video because they're not going to be confident, especially if the boss calls them on a video call, they're not going to answer on video. So that's the number one thing, is having good culture around that about your remote teams. And two, once you start encouraging it and just saying everyone's going to do it, that one or two people that just don't feel comfortable, they're not going to feel like not doing it when everybody else is. So, and it starts with the leaders. You got to find those people who are totally comfortable doing it and get them on board and encouraging other people. And it has to start with the people who are the leaders and the business owners in the group. You've got to be comfortable with it and just get on and just rip the Band-Aid off and do it. And it will be rough at first. People will be a little bit leery, but just make it not a big deal. Don't stare at it and have fun with it and be okay with it, and people will get over that hump, and it will be the courage is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the bigger it gets. And it's the same thing with getting on video. It just takes a little bit of video courage.
Can I add one tip on that too?
Yeah.
So one thing, we have the same issue. I mean, at Microsoft, we have people who are not real comfortable being on camera, and our leadership has tried to do a few things to make them more comfortable. And so one of our general managers in our team deliberately did his, he's on video, of course, for our big team call, and he's deliberately in a very casual room of his house. I think he was in his living room or something, and behind him you could see, pictures and books and a little bit of mess, and his kids walked through the camera at one point, and it was fine. And I think setting that example helped. Mm-hmm. And then one of the other product teams, their general manager for their product, and a general manager at Microsoft is a pretty big deal. That's a fairly high executive. He will deliberately on some of their video calls, like, wear a silly hat or some funny glasses or something. I mean, he'll just do, or one time he had a really funny T-shirt on purpose for the video call. And part of the point was to make it so that people realize, hey, it's not that serious. You don't have to sit here in a suit and tie and act like you're a news anchor on TV. We're just people. We're here to talk, and it's fine if you're not, picture perfect on camera.
Yeah,
I think that's helped a lot, is that our leadership has set some examples.
Come as you are type of approach.
Exactly, come as you are and just have fun with it.
That's an important distinction, especially during these days right now, is that when you're on these calls and they're business calls, a year ago, if you heard someone's dog bark or their kid screech, like, it was etiquette, it was not a good thing. That has changed, like the business etiquette around that. If things that are going on in the home, it's not a big deal, and in the culture of your company, it needs to be okay.
Yeah, very much so.
All right, next question. Can you talk a little bit about authentication apps, Microsoft Authenticator versus something like Duo?
So with the caveat that my day job at Microsoft is that I run the end user content for cybersecurity, I'm going to be a little bit biased in favor of our app. I will also say that I'm not intimately familiar with how the Duo operates, and so I don't want to pretend to be an authority on the Duo. But the Microsoft Authenticator app is available for free on every smartphone platform, so iPhone and Android. And as I mentioned in the slide deck, it generates. You can add accounts to it, and you can add more accounts than just Microsoft accounts. So you can add your Twitter account, your Facebook account, all sorts of third-party accounts. My Authenticator app on my Android phone, I've got pretty much every social media or website that lets me use an authenticator. I have them added as a second factor on my Authenticator app in Microsoft Authenticator. It generates that pseudo-random code every 30. It's a 6-digit code. Every 30 seconds it updates, and the code is of course unique to your device. And so it's extremely good that way. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you're using it with Microsoft accounts, it can also use a different authentication method. So for example, when I sign into my account at work, I have the two-factor also. And so I sign in on a new device at work, and it sends the two-factor code to my authenticator after I put in my password. It doesn't actually ask me for the 6-digit code. All it wants me to do is touch my fingerprint to the fingerprint reader on the back of my phone to authenticate. And so so that's another way that the Authenticator app works. I think it's a great tool myself, and it is free, so you can't go too far wrong with that. You can find it in the App Store, the Google or Apple app stores.
We make the distinction between the two apps is if the client is only going to be using Office 365, the Microsoft Authenticator app is a no-brainer. Yep. It's free, it integrates beautifully. When we move to things like a Duo is when they need to authenticate third-party applications or third-party device systems. Like maybe they want to do remote VPN through a hardware VPN system. That doesn't integrate as well with Microsoft Authenticator as seamlessly, where a Duo does. So it really depends on the situation, and we look at each client holistically to say what's the perfect solution for each client. But most of the time, it is Microsoft Authenticator.
Whichever one you choose, I strongly recommend have an Authenticator app, even if it's not ours.
Okay, next question. Can you talk a little bit about OneNote and the best use of that? Is that a good choice, or have new products come along that have outdated it?
Oh no, I was just looking over my shoulder because well, that's the wrong book. Well, anyway, I wrote 2 books on OneNote. I love OneNote. I use it all day. I usually have at least 2, sometimes 3 OneNote windows open at any given time. OneNote is a fantastic tool for gathering notes and research. It's also a really good tool for collaborating. So I very often at Microsoft, for example, most of our groups, for example, I have an M365 cybersecurity group at Microsoft. And in addition to using SharePoint and using the shared inbox and all those tools, we have a shared OneNote notebook for our group where we can gather information, collaborate on notes and outlines, things like that. So yeah, OneNote is a terrific tool. And one of the nice things about OneNote also is if you've stored your OneNote notebooks on SharePoint or OneDrive, as you hopefully have, you can get those notes on any device. So I have my notebook synced to my Android phone. I get my notes on my laptop, on my desktop, in the web, on my Mac. I can get those notes anywhere. And so yeah, OneNote's a great tool for that. How you use it's a little bit up to you. It's kind of a blank sheet of paper in that respect. But yeah, it's a super powerful tool. I love OneNote. And one of the things I always do is I usually have a OneNote window open and set to always appear on top of the screen so that it's always available to me for scratch, as kind of like a scratch pad. I guess last comment I would make about OneNote is that if you have a device like this one that's got a pen, a digital pen, I usually, when we're on campus at Microsoft, I almost always go to my meetings carrying just the screen from my Surface Book and the pen, and I ink my notes in the meetings in OneNote. So.
All right, and it looks like our last question is for Tony. Tony, what process do you use when managing teams remotely to help a teammate whose performance is low and or their expectations are not being met?
That's a good question. So one of the things that we do here at Roll and Shore, and I've done at other companies where I've helped build out teams, is communication. Number one, right? You got to have great communication with your teams. Is building those expectations. So I don't ever want to get it to the point where you're like doing, having to call them in and say, hey, you're having performance problems. We want to put you on some kind of performance plan, right? What we do is we make everything transparent. So when we have our stand-up meetings twice a week, the tasks that are going on that everyone is assigned to and where they're following on those tasks, whether they're hitting their deadlines or they're falling behind or they're missing things. And for whatever reason, maybe they're not missing it because of their performance. Maybe it's because there's actual real issues going on. There's transparency across the whole team that way. And so there's not this silo effect between everybody on the team. And so everyone feels like there's this communication. And so that changes the culture of the team when you do it that way. And so when I start seeing someone having those kinds of issues where their expectations aren't being met, that's what those video one-on-ones are for, right? Is those regular check-in calls with your team to say, hey, I'm gonna, I sit down and I have these conversations like, what are your goals? What do you want? I ask training questions like, what do you want training wise? What are your growth goals? What do you want as far as like conferences do you want to go to, or training materials do you need to grow? What's the next skill that you want to increase in? And then we go over kind of like what their tasks are looking at and looking at, if they're missing things and why did they do that. And sometimes it's as easily as, my grandmother died like last week and I've been having a tough time. And if you didn't really actually ask the question, you would have never known. And so sometimes it's just having those calls to just, meet people on a human level and having some empathy with people. And when you do that, you'll find that people will actually work harder for you. It comes back to a saying that I fully believe in, is people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, well, that covers all of the questions. So thank you, Tony, and thank you, Ben. Appreciate your time. And thank you, everyone else, for attending our Running Remotely webinar. We are going to send out a link to everyone with a recording of this presentation in case you missed anything. And if you have any other questions or need any help implementing any of the solutions that we discussed today, please feel free to reach out and contact us anytime. Our speakers are happy to help, and their email addresses are listed there on the screen for you. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great afternoon.